The start of the Premier League season is just 1 week away, and that means you also have 1 week to get your fantasy team locked into place. And if you haven't played EPL Fantasy before, I'll leave a link below in the description where you can create your own account for free. It's a really fun way to keep up with the season and compete with your friends. The rules are really simple. You have £100 million to build your ideal squad, and after every week, you'll earn points based on their performances. So I'm gonna jump into my team and show you my strategies and selections for game week 1. Okay, so I've jumped into my fantasy team builder here, and let's go over all of my picks. So to start out, we're gonna talk about my bench players. So in Fantasy Premier League, you're afforded a starting 11 and then 4 bench players for 15 players in total. So I would recommend, in order to maximize your starting 11, I go for the cheapest possible players in each category for my bench. So that means I have Gabriel Slonina, the second choice goalkeeper for Chelsea. He may even go out on loan, but he was only £4 million, followed by Dan Potts, who plays for Luton Town. He was only £4 million. Sven Anderson for Newcastle, he was £4.5 million. And let's see, I believe his name is Cauley Woodrow for Luton Town as well. He was £4.5 million. So going for the cheapest possible bench, that's just going to allow you to spend more on your starting 11 and ultimately give you a little bit more depth and talent. So in structuring my team, I focused on getting as many premium players as I could in my starting 11. Now, generally, premium players are going to be described as any player that's exceeding £10 million in price tag, and there's only a handful of them in the entire Premier League. So these are going to be players that are going to win you the most points week in, week out. They're going to be getting goals, getting assists, and ultimately helping your team beat everyone else in your league, and ultimately, win as many games as possible if you're playing head-to-head as well. So in my team, I went for 3 premium players, and that's Erling Haaland, Kevin De Bruyne, and Mo Salah. So it was pretty tough to fit these 3 players in the team and still have enough money to afford other quality players, but I think we were able to do that. But those are the 3 key players that the team, I'd say, is built around. So following that, we'll go into them more in depth when we get to their section. But in goal, I started with Emi Martinez with Aston Villa. Pretty affordable goalie. He was only coming in at £5 million, but it's great to have a goalie that's going to have solid clean sheet record and is going to be on a solid squad overall. Aston Villa as a team was struggling a lot at the beginning of last season, but when Unai Emery came on, they picked up a lot. I think that they're a really solid team right now. I believe they qualified for European football as well. So for me, I think it's a pretty easy decision, and at $5 million, I think it's a pretty fair price as well. So we have Emi Martinez in goal. Moving on to our back line, we're going to start with Alexander Zinchenko from Arsenal. Zinchenko was a great fullback to have last season when he was healthy. He did have a few injuries here and there, but I still think that fully fit, he's going to be Arsenal's first choice fullback. He gets forward offensively. I think that's from his Man City days. He's a great team player. He loves having the ball. He has a few weak points defensively, but I think he more than compensates for it with his offensive contributions. So this is a player that's going to easily notch several assists this season. And Arsenal is one of the strongest teams in the league and has one of the strongest defenses overall. So they're probably going to notch a lot of clean sheets as well. So after Zinchenko, he only costs $5 million, so I think that's a solid deal as well for a pretty top-tier fullback. I have Sven Botman from Newcastle. Now, I think that almost any of the defensive players from Newcastle that are going to regularly get minutes would be a great deal. Obviously, Kieran Trippier is really popular. Tons of EPL fantasy players have Trippier. That's a great decision, but he's going to cost a little bit more than Botman here. Sven Botman should be getting, 90 minutes regularly for Newcastle, and he's also going to be collecting a lot of clean sheets, as Newcastle has one of the best defenses in the Premier League. So it's pretty easy points to get when you're just constantly racking up those clean sheets. You definitely don't want to have defenders from teams that concede often. Even if they're good teams, just losing clean sheets is going to lose you a lot of points over the season. So another center back pairing we have here, we have Gabriel from Arsenal. As I mentioned with Zinchenko, Arsenal has a pretty strong defense overall. Gabriel is one of their strongest center backs, and depending on injuries that could be sustained by Saliba, he is probably going to get most of those starting positions. He'll get a lot of 90 minutes throughout the whole season, and he also gets goals, which is really important for defenders as well. So an important thing to remember about fantasy is that goals scored by defenders give you more points than goals scored by midfielders or attackers. So Gabriel winning headers on set pieces and corners could be absolutely huge. Now our final defender here is from Brighton. We went with Estupinian. He was a really popular fantasy pick towards the end of last season. I think he played 36 of 38 games for Brighton last year. So really consistent. There's no one really that's going to take him out of that starting spot, I think, for Brighton. They're a very attacking team. They play great football. They're in Europe this year because of how well he did last season. They get a decent amount of clean sheets, and it's likely he'll be able to notch a few assists as well. And at only $5 million, he's a pretty great deal overall. So to recap the prices, it's Estupinian at $5 million, Gabriel at $5 million, Sven Botman at $4.5 million, and Zinchenko at $5 million as well. So let's move on to the midfield now. We're going to start with Gabriel Martinelli from Arsenal, who is an amazing winger. I think he was one of their standout players other than Bukayo Saka last season, and he's going to come in at a cost of £8 million. So not the most expensive player in this team, but definitely up there. He's a pretty high value player. And as far as someone that's going to get a lot of goals, a lot of assists this season, you can definitely see Martinelli is going to be up there in the leaderboards, barring any injury he could sustain this season. He doesn't have too much competition from that winger position. I think him and Saka are going to be pretty much definite starts anytime that they're healthy for Arsenal. And Mikel Arteta doesn't usually do as much rotation as other managers, so once he's really found his starting 11, I think it's pretty solidified. So I think Martinelli is going to get a lot of minutes. He's very skilled, and I see him doing, honestly, even better than last season. So that's why I have him in the team. Kevin De Bruyne, he's one of the premium players on the squad. He costs £10.5 million. He's the third most expensive player here. But De Bruyne, I think he's an absolutely great player to have on fantasy. He is just so consistent, and compared to other players on City, he doesn't get rotated much either, because Pep Guardiola loves to rotate his teams. That's one of the reasons I don't have many City defenders in here, and I'm pretty cautious about having too many fringe players that could get rotated in and out, like Phil Foden, for example. Like, I think Phil Foden's an amazing player, probably one of the best midfielders and attackers in the Premier League, but because Pep is so rotational, I don't know when he's going to get his minutes. Whereas Kevin De Bruyne is almost every time he's going to be in that starting 11 if he's fit, because he's probably the best midfielder in the Premier League. He not only notches double-digit assists every season, but he oftentimes gets double digits as goals as well. So you're looking at a player who's going to bring home tons of points week in, week out. So De Bruyne is in that center mid spot. Then moving over to our final two midfielders, I have Pascal Gross from Brighton. He was a pretty popular pick last season as well. He's going to come in at £6.5 million, so a decent mid-tier price level. I think he's going to get a decent amount of play this year for Brighton. I still think he's one of their best midfield options, and he should be a pretty comfortable, around 10 goal to 10 a season, probably 15 total goal involvements, I think, at least for the year. And I think it's a great price point as well, only £6.5 million. And it's that, good value that allows me to get my final midfielder, who's Mo Salah from Liverpool. So this is another one of my premium picks. Mo Salah comes in at £12.5 million. But I think he'll be well worth it this season. Salah year after year gets well into double-digit goals, and he typically always has more than 20 goal contributions. And Liverpool struggled at the start of last season, and a lot of EPL fantasy players that had Salah ended up dropping him. But towards the end of the season, I think Liverpool started to find their form. Jurgen Klopp was changing around the formation. He was adjusting the system, occasionally putting Trent into midfield, switching from a back four to a back three. And I think they really started to find their groove. And I think that that's going to ideally continue into 2023, 2024. And, if they continue to play well, Salah is going to continue to get goals. He's going to continue to assist. So when Salah is firing, he's a player you need to have in your team. Because when he's on, he's easily one of the best players in the league. So I was glad I was able to fit him in here as well. And then that brings us to our final two players on the team. Starting with our last premium pick, we have Erling Haaland. The simplest way to put it, this is a must-have pick if you're playing fantasy. For any player this year, you can't not have Erling Haaland in your team. He was record goal scorer his first year in the Premier League. He's one of the only players on the City team, probably along with Kevin De Bruyne, that's a shoo-in to start every single game. If projections remain the same and he stays on course, he's going to be well on track for at least 15 goals for the season, likely 20 or more. And not just goals, he's also a great hold-up player. He's a good playmaker as well. He's a solid passer of the ball. So he's someone who's going to get a lot of goal involvements as well. He's going to get plenty of assists. So barring any injury, I think if there's one player I'd recommend you have to try and fit in your team if you want to do well, it would be Haaland. So that leaves us with one other starting striker spot, and there was a few different options I had for this. And by the way, Haaland is the most expensive player in fantasy. He's 14 million pounds, but he costs that much for a reason. He rakes in a huge amount of points every week. But for our starting striker, our second position, we had a few options around that 7 million price point. And I decided to go with Nicholas Jackson from Chelsea. He's a new transfer, which is always, has a little bit of uncertainty surrounding it. But he has had an amazing preseason. So I've been following Chelsea this preseason. Nicholas Jackson notched 3 goals in his first 3 preseason games. He seems to be a really confident goal scorer. He's very physical. He has good hold-up play. He's unselfish, so he's good at passing the ball. He's also notched several assists in preseason as well. And Chelsea doesn't have a lot of depth in the striker position right now, so it's very likely that Jackson is going to be getting a lot of play time. And that's all the more likely because he's shown so strong in preseason. He's going to be getting that starting striker spot. And I'm pretty confident with him there, up there with Haaland. I think that he's going to be getting 90 minutes really regularly because there's not too many options to rotate out for him, especially now that it looks like Christopher Nkunku might be having a small knee injury. So I'm pretty happy with Jackson's current contributions. It's a little bit of a wild card since he's it's going to be his first season in the Premier League and he'll have to adapt to the physicality. But there's a lot of different strikers around the 6.5 to 7 million price point that you can change him out for as well. And yeah, that pretty much does it for my EPL fantasy team for the 2023-2024 season. So hopefully this team has a pretty strong showing for the first couple weeks. Obviously, as is the case with fantasy, after game week 1, you're allowed 1 to 2 transfers every week. So you can transfer once, and if you don't use your transfer, it banks to 2 transfers. So if you ever need to make a change due to an injury or you want to change up your strategy, it's pretty easy to do throughout the season. But let me know what you think of this team. Also, let me know if you're going to be playing fantasy this year, and let me know what your team is going to be looking like. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.